Well, welcome back to the Built Different podcast. Great to see y'all, fellas. I am freezing out down here in Texas. It's single digits today, and I'm not used to this weather. I'm freezing out here in this little shed of mine. And Adam, I'm a little jealous. You're out in Phoenix. Don't know where you're at, where in the world. And yeah, it's freezing out here.
Yeah. Phoenix, Arizona this week. It's about 75 degrees and sunny. Can't complain one bit. You got weeks since you left Iowa.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute, Brian. I need some of that thicker skin and blood down here. This is not used to this.
How quickly the body forgets. I think I was talking to someone recently about being mostly on the exteriors and how I spent all day outside. And I don't know if I would be able to survive more than 10 minutes on a boom lift outdoors right now. So
yeah, man, kudos to those guys. I mean, Carhartt, they got to be just raking in the bucks. Like, think about that. I mean, I didn't wear my Carhartt today. I should have with my wool socks, but that's freezing down here. I mean,
any of you guys see any of the TikToks or the Instagram reels where people see other people wearing Carhartt and they say, "Where'd you serve?"
No. That's pretty good.
You have a lot. It's like obviously a huge trend right now where like price of Carhartt's going up because I don't know if hipsters is a like a derogatory word, but like it's becoming very trendy to wear workwear.
Really? I wonder, can
it's insane. Like people are going into Home Depots and buying clothes off other people.
Dude,
but this is a whole other world.
Maybe Carhartt becomes the new Stanley for guys, you know? Maybe if they just have some like influencer type moments that, you know, I mean, can you guys imagine Stanley's? I mean, how that took off? I know we're already digressing from what we're actually going to talk about, but I need some Carhartt stuff. So Carhartt, if you're listening, we're freezing out down here in Texas. So
onto the podcast, Brian, the workwear has hit the ski slopes too. Lots of people in denim and the gloves these days. The trend is that they look like leather work gloves. I've got some myself, so it seems to have hit the snow community as well.
As long as they're cut resistant, then I'm good with it.
Man, should we just see if Carhartt can sponsor this, and then we can do Carhartt giveaways on the show here? I think that'd be. I don't think it's gonna last long down here in the cold, but whew, boy, it is. I think my shed says it's like 62 degrees now. It's cold, fellas. That's cold. I know. We're just gonna move on. All right. So what we're gonna talk about today? This is gonna be a good time. We're gonna run down here. We'll trip down memory lane, fellas. I found that we've kind of gotten asked these questions really each independently. And we were talking about this the other day of, man, what are some topics that you think could stir some great conversation? And one, I think just it's review season, promotion season, new job season. Gosh, Brian, I've seen so many people getting new jobs and titles and roles out there. I don't know if it's just the new year, new me, new you kind of thing, but yeah, it's have you seen it too, or is it just me that I'm seeing everyone's stuff pop up? And congrats for promotions. Hey, I love it.
It's been all over my feed, and it's been bringing back memories of the time when we each probably eventually left the companies we were at, and just like knowing what's probably happening behind the scenes as conversations, relationships of when you're going to a direct competitor is a whole nother beast. So.
I mean, it reminds me of just making up titles, Adam. You know what I'm talking about? We just kind of just make up titles and let it fly.
Yeah, go check my LinkedIn from a made-up title these days. It's a good one. But yeah, I think to your point earlier, the questions that we get asked a lot, at least in the last probably 6 to 12 months, I have fielded more questions from current industry people about like, hey, how'd you get that job over there? Or what do you do over there? It seems like you're living a pretty sweet life. Like, how do I go do that? I think those are a lot of the questions that you're referring to that we've been asked lately.
So the rundown we got over here is, it's a little post-Valentine's Day. Let's talk about our first love of the construction industry. We'll talk about a little bit of kind of how each of us landed in the construction industry. I've heard both of y'all stories, and I think it's always fascinating. I feel like we could camp here and just talk about this probably as a full episode, honestly, of just like the ins and outs, and we'll try to hit on the highlights of it. But I think all three of us kind of had a catalyst moment of, hey, like what took the turn, or how do we, get on the off ramp and into maybe a different industry of the tech side of it. And boy, I think the last one here of kind of how's the grass. Whew, we got a lot of questions to field there. I think that's going to be fun to just kind of aggregate some of the questions that we've all been asked probably many times independently. I know, Brian, we've talked about this on seasons past too, of just, hey, what's it like? What do I know? What do I don't know? And I mean, I've probably fielded a dozen LinkedIn messages of folks that are just like, hey, I'm thinking about this, and can you give me some insight? And honestly, I love it. Like, if thank you to the ones that have sent those. It's awesome, because I definitely reached out and had some folks say this, or reached out to some folks and asked those similar questions too. And so, yeah, we're gonna get into it. But so Adam, I don't know if you want to kick us off here. I know you probably have the most gray hair of all three of us, not counting beard and or head on top. I know it's probably why you're wearing a hat today, but yeah, we'll have you, unless you want to tell people how old you are. I don't. Are you the oldest of the three?
I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest of the three, and I'm not scared. I'll be 40 this year.
Whoa.
It's a big milestone in August. So I'm August. You got what, 4 more months to get yourself dialed in for a good present.
Okay, I can dial that in. Brian, I know you're the bookend on the other end. Not to you. You're a Gen Z, right? Is that?
No, I think I just missed the cutoff. I'm turning 30 this September.
So that's you're still in the millennial side, right?
Yeah, I'm eerily close to the Gen Z. I could play on both sides of the fence, but ideally I identify as millennial.
Okay, millennial. It's crazy that you and I are both in the millennial camp. And Adam, what are you, a Gen Xer?
I honestly don't even know anymore. People talk about it all the time. I've not done the proper research to figure out who the heck I am. Maybe this is something I need to do.
I can tell you by that response, you are a Gen Xer. So
okay, good.
Let's just have you kick it off. How about that? That's about how every Gen Xer responds. So
okay,
that was great. You definitely answered that
up today.
Yeah, that was nice. All right, your first love, Mr. Delamonica. That was perfect. So get into it. Tell us how you got into construction, but don't get into the juicy stuff yet of kind of why you chose to move. So I'm sure Brian and I will have some. I've heard the story a handful of times, but I think every time you tell it, I got something new to walk through. So,
yeah, man. Obviously, a fun topic. One that it is a cool memory trip down memory lane. Anytime we go back and kind of reminisce a bit, but I mean, the beginning. Obviously, we'll try and speed up to the current days as we go. But my very first exposure to construction was really through my dad. He's an architect. I grew up going to job sites with him. I was always, from the very youngest of ages, super fascinated by the equipment, watching a building structure come out of the ground. Structural is still my favorite phase. Was always very impressed also by the people, right? The reminiscing on the fact that I used to call them all tough guys, right? The carpenters and the cement masons and the folks that were out there working hard every day. Like that was my first exposure to construction, really, through architecture. Grew up with a May line in my room. Speaking of ages, anybody, Brian, Grant, you know what a May line is?
No, that's another Gen Xer. Can't
figure that out.
Okay, well, go Google it. Basically, an architectural drafting board. But my younger years, I redesigned our house, remodeled it about 6 times on paper. My parents were like, "Hey, we got this nice house because we can live in it." I wanted to change it every day, but that was obviously as a kid. But as I grew up, as I got further into my education, I actually started in architecture school right out of high school. So. Started as an architect, which is kind of fun. In a lot of these conversations I've had, it's pretty amazing how many people in the construction industry tend to start with that idea of architecture, right? Hey, I wanted to be an architect when I grew up, and they kind of find themselves on a construction path. And I was just like that as well. Got pretty early into architecture school, figured out that I was not the artist that was necessary to be a good architect. Man, I feel like I'm going to date myself through this whole episode, but you guys remember MS Paint?
Do I mean, is that a joke? Like
no,
MS? The fact that you call it MS too is a little Gen Xer, not going to lie, but.
Okay. Well, we have a theme going now.
Did you even use the pen back in the day? That like pen on the screen?
You talking about Clippy?
No, I'm talking about that pen that you used on Microsoft Paint. It was
I feel like you would spend some time hanging out with Clippy.
All right, back to the story. I do remember Clippy though.
Yeah, man. But the point of bringing up MS Paint was, if you ever tried to select or create a custom color in MS Paint, there was that circle that was like all the blended rainbow colors, right? Well, there's a special name for that. It's called the Rorschach color wheel. And in
Oh
architecture
boy.
school, you have to be able to create that with colored pencils. And that was the moment that I figured out this isn't for me. And so pretty quickly failed that, and found myself at that point in junior college kind of floundering, trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do with my life? Where am I going? What's going on? And that was the point at which I started what my dad lovingly calls the Northern California Junior College Tour. I always said they put them in every city. They didn't put them in every city for you not to use them. Units were $18 a unit at that point. So I spent the next 5 years going to 9 different junior colleges and traveling around Northern California, trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to be when I grew up. During that period of time, I took a job as a laborer, basically, for a small remodel company, and kind of connected back to my love of building and my roots with architecture, and figured out, okay, I still like the buildings. I just like building them better than I like drawing them. So that really kind of got my North Star pointed towards construction management. I went to Sacramento State for construction management, started there in 2008. And then if you tuned into the last episode of Built Different, I talked a lot about the conference that I went to last week at the ASC Reno competition. I competed in that as a college student, met my first Turner construction employee, who Jeff Frost, shout out, was the guy who kind of quote unquote discovered me when a couple of students, myself included, decided in 2008 to sit down and teach ourselves how to use Revit, which at the time was sort of a budding design technology.
Now he's getting into some real world stuff, Brian. We moved from the Microsoft Paint to Reddit, so now we're
the learning curve has jumped quickly here.
I'm still shocked at $18 a unit. I think that probably has outpaced Bitcoin at this point.
Very much so. The junior college education, man, definitely. It's more expensive now, but if I had any offspring, I would definitely push them into that route. But just jumping into the beginning of Turner, like spent 3 years as a VDC, as the VDC department in the Northern California office. It's kind of got my foot in with the big commercial world. Ultimately, I got into construction because I like to build stuff, as much as the VDC opportunity was what got me in the door in the first place, and was a super fantastic just foundation to the career and my love of sort of the tech tools, right? We'll come back to that as we go. But starting out in VDC was interesting, different way to start. Then I ultimately went into operations, where I went to my first project, Stockton Courthouse, and proceeded to get my ass kicked for the next 2.5 years as a first-time engineer. Took on $60 million worth of structural scopes, everything from excavation, piles, foundations, all the way to topping out. And man, you want to talk about an industry that is, I think we all know, and anybody listening knows, that this is an industry of feet to the fire, throw you into the wolves, sink or swim, whatever phrase you want to use. That was the job that did it. And, my performance on that job as a first-time engineer, maybe not the best, actually not maybe, it wasn't the best. I, was learning as I went. And so I kind of carried that job as a chip on my shoulder through the rest of my career. But that gets me kind of to the first, where I'll pause my story and let you guys jump in. But this is, at the end of that project, was my first kind of peek over the fence, if I can call it that, to check out some greener grass maybe. And I, without taking the job, spoiler alert, was sort of sniffing around, maybe making a move to a subcontractor role. I had a really good relationship with Steel Erector on the project, and so I started to kind of explore. Wasn't unhappy where I was, but I definitely was interested in what else was out there. And so I ultimately decided to stay. And what's important in this mindset is that I felt very pot committed, right? I just went through my history, right, from childhood all the way through, and I felt I had gone through so much, whether it was junior college or architecture school or even the first few years of in construction. I'd gone through so much to get to this point where I wanted to be, that I felt pot committed. I needed to see it through. I had sort of a feeling that I would be giving up at that point if I decided to dip out after a really tough project and one that put me through the ringer. So I'll pause there on my story as kind of my first sniff of the grass, but that's kind of where I started.
Sounds like a typical loyalist Gen Xer there of like, I can't leave. Like, this is where I'm going to retire. Yeah. And I got to know, though, did you put MS Paint on your resume before the Revit stuff? I mean, I can only imagine you getting so frustrated in like all the property fields of Revit. You're like, screw this. I'm going to go back to Paint.
Yeah, Paint was right there between Word and PowerPoint, so it was good.
Hey, still used today, man. We're not that not that new age. I kind of forgot how similar our stories were. I'll share a little bit. Just honestly, I could feel like I could copy paste. Very very similar from like the architecture background and kind of a oh crap moment of like, dude, I can't do this. Like, so yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up in a construction family, but yeah, I remember very early on, it was like I don't know, like a trades class in high school. We built this shed and made it out of popsicle sticks before we built it. And I was like, dude, this is pretty cool. Like there was a class our senior year of college or senior year of high school, sorry, that, yeah, it's called building trades. You basically show up first day of class and the foundation's poured on this residential lot. And they're like, all right, about, 6 months down the road, you're going to put this thing on an open house and show it off to people. It was awesome. Like it was just a really cool eye-opening experience. It was like a 1,500 square foot house, nothing crazy, but 15 students, senior students, by the way, that were like, yeah, basically showed up and we built this house from, foundation to finishes. And it was just a really cool experience. I remember that was kind of like okay, this is pretty cool. I never really thought like the going into the trades or like the subcontractor or just like contractor route was going to be what I wanted, but it really taught me like, all right, I mean, I can, put flooring down or put cabinets in or do some electrical work. Or I really just kind of thought of it as like, hey, I'll have the skill for later if I own a home and what it looks like. But it actually opened my eyes because I thought like, oh, I'll use this to be a better architect. Like I thought I wanted to do architecture like any kid that plays with Legos until they're, old enough to be laughed at for playing with Legos. But I still play with Legos with my kiddos now. So it was something that, yeah. So I grew up in Iowa, obviously my thin blood up here, or down here, I should say now in Texas. But yeah, I mean, Iowa State had a really good architecture program and was pretty curious about that and went on a college visit. And I mean, similar to you, Adam, not this, what'd you call it? That little color wheel? Didn't have that moment, but.
The Rorschach color wheel. Write it down, kids.
Can't even Google it. Can't even spell it. That's all right. But I remember going on a tour of the design college and like walked into this like, advisor's room and she had all these like drawings and paintings on the walls. Like, these are amazing. Like, where'd you get these? Essentially, because they're all framed, and she's like, oh, these are our like first year students. And I looked at my mom and I was like, yeah, this is not going to work out. Like, I'm for sure not going to go. And it was weird too, because you had to like apply to be in the design college, which I wasn't like a huge fan of. And it was just kind of this like soul crushing moment. I was like, dude, I want to be an architect my whole like upbringing. Like I was doing the same thing, maybe not in Microsoft Paint, but like I was just like, I thought that's what I wanted to do. And I remember we went back to the admissions building and my mom pulled out this pamphlet that said construction engineering. And I was like, what the heck is that? Like, couldn't tell you what that was. And, she was reading it to me and was like, hey, should we like go check this out before we, head out of town? And eventually, set up a tour. And I didn't even realize that like that program was just as good, if not better than the architecture program at Iowa State. And yeah, it just kind of launched me down this path of like, all right, engineering, kind of could see the path of what that looked like and kind of understand. I definitely would say I resonate more with an engineer than like an architect or a designer. Just didn't know it. Had no idea that was like something that was another kind of part of the process. And yeah, that program led to some really great internships and really good community of students that was super collaborative. We were all, kind of there to help build each other up, and the career fair was great. Got to intern with a lot of different types of companies. I didn't even know what jobs like a construction engineer did. Like I didn't even know that, oh yeah, you go work for a general contractor, you become a project manager, you kind of work your way up that route. Like I had no idea. And like, incredibly thankful and blessed to like have 4 internships in that season of Iowa State, and got to, stay local and home, got to, come down to Texas, which is eventually where I moved, and got to honestly work and be a part of some great contractors. I mean, I had an internship in Omaha, working around the College World Series stadium. Got to come down to Texas and work on some school system projects. Got to be in Kansas City and work on a hospital Like, it was just eye opening. I was just eating it up, loving it. Like, these internships were just such a great way to test the water and kind of see where things landed. And so, just to wrap this up, like, yeah, my into construction was definitely not as expected, but ultimately came down to Texas after I graduated and started my first job. And I'll kind of share some catalyst moments in kind of the next segment here too. But yeah, it was just really interesting. Really thankful for like the internships and the opportunities to see what this was like. And 3 months was the perfect amount of time to like get in and see what departments were like, see what kind of the jobs and roles and responsibilities were, and ultimately just said, hey, I'm going to come down to Texas and we'll start there. And I'll share a little bit more in the next moment. But yeah, I kind of forgot how similar our stories were.
I like it. I had a couple takeaways from that. One, the irony that you work in what we call now the Hagen shed, and your first exposure to construction was a small shed at the high school class. That's pretty great. Legos are timeless, dude. I mean, if we're gonna date ourselves here, Legos are forever an okay thing.
Dude, the thing now though is I'm a big fan of. So I got 2 kiddos and Magnetiles. So I have to preface that I'm not just buying these for my own. That'd be incredibly weird. But yeah, Magnetiles, dude. Those are the thing now. Like,
Magnetiles are the jam.
I
got nieces and nephews.
It also still sounds like you're buying them for yourself, but I got you.
I mean, there may be some Amazon packages that show up, and my wife's like, "Hey, this has nothing to do with our son," but it works. So, yeah. But
one other observation there, Grant, is to your point about not knowing the jobs, right? Like not knowing the positions and the titles in the construction industry. I think that is probably one of the reasons that a lot of the people in the industry right now started in sort of an architecture background or whatever they thought they were getting into. I think that the average, parent or like lay person at home looks at building construction and says the word architecture. And so it kind of plants in the kids' minds like, oh, I want to be an architect. Like that, I think that's where that comes from. And I'm in the same boat where like, it wasn't until college, it wasn't until my first internship that I'm like, oh, a project manager is this, or I didn't even know a project engineer existed. Like I didn't know what those options were. So just a thought I had while you were explaining that.
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate to go back and be at a lot of career fairs for the company I worked at back at Iowa State. And man, I remember so many architects and so many engineers of like civil engineers, mechanical engineers, or just other people that are like, dude, what's this construction stuff? Like, did I kind of miss the mark of where I started my education? Because I keep hearing from my friends or seeing this career fair and all these people that are like here, and the placement rates within that major were just like skyrocketing. And so it is crazy, just the, I think, awareness of job titles and even on this little bottom ticker that we have on the screen is like, did you have a family in construction? I mean, I hear all the time that's like probably more than likely the predecessor of people getting into construction, or like a family friend or something like that that's like, hey, you should kind of consider this. And man, that's such a bad, or not bad, but it's just like, it's such a sad predecessor to a lot of people going into construction, is like, oh, you just happen to know about it. It's like the awareness just isn't there to, I think, help drive obviously what awesome opportunities there are. And that's we could go down that route of just the awareness of what this industry is. But Mr. Not millennial, well, millennial, but not quite on the fringes, fringe millennial. I'm going to make that up. Brian, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, so I'm one of those sad predecessors. I come from 2 generations of construction builders. So it's it's a good segue. So let's get into it. My grandparents, my grandmother worked had like a material shop in Peru. My grandfather did small general construction, and then pretty much amongst my mother's side, 9 siblings, not including her. Most of them were engineers, architects, all from Peru. She had an accounting background and did a lot of work with my grandfather. So when her and my father eventually came to America from Peru, they started, doing what they know. Started a small carpentry company. It was like, started with very small renovations. But I grew up driving around with my dad in the truck, because that was just more normal. Like, just sit in the truck and watch projects. Don't touch anything. Don't poke your eye out, and you'll be good. You can keep hanging out with me. And it was great. Just, you see some of the hardest working people ever, uh, in any profession, where you just grew up admiring and having such a love for going from, this empty pile of materials to an actual thing. So I was always drawn to construction my entire life. I knew that I was going to be somewhere in that vicinity, but it wasn't until I got to college that I started having a love for tech. Actually, even in high school, when the iPod Touch came out, I used to hack around it. I we you know I met some people on the internet. Like, I think it was like a kid in China. Like, I made a group of friends there, and we would like make these makeshift microphones that we would make the iPod Touch into kind of like, yeah, not an iPhone, making calls over VoIP. Uh, and I was very hackathon-y, but I didn't really have a place where those two things could be combined, right? So in my mind, I was either I'm going to go computer engineering or I'm going to go into construction and take over the family business. And it was this fork in the road where the construction tech, I mean, maybe was a thing at that time, but it's not like it is now. There's the amount of job titles, people hiring for it. It really wasn't a thing. So I used to do a lot of hackathons on the weekends where you got free food to go build apps and stuff with groups of people. And I was like, great, two birds, one stone, broke college kid. And I get to, build some things. And it wasn't until then that I got funding to start my first company, where it was called Catalyst, CATA-LIST. So what I was
Ooh,
using,
trendy.
yeah, so this was like even earlier on around the Matterport days, or there were still, I wasn't even aware that they existed up until then, where they had their own camera. But we used to take the old Samsungs, and I would create virtual tours of low priced apartments in the north end of Boston, because there was a huge group of international students, so students from Russia, India, etc., that were just coming over internationally that couldn't physically tour the apartments. So I found like this little niche in the market where I'd go to real estate companies, and I got my license and I listed apartments. And month one, I made like two or three rental agreements. Month two was like 15 to 20, and I was banking. I was like, great, I love this tech thing. This is great. And then very quickly realized that I needed to start thinking about maybe merging this with the construction side. And I went to a conference called the ABX conference. I got a booth there to show Catalyst, and I was right next door to Consigli Construction's booth. That's where I met one of the, one of kind of someone I call a mentor, Jack Moran, who is now the director of technology and innovation there, but at the time was the head of VDC. And being the booth next to him, he's like, "How old are you? Like, what are you doing here?" Right? And quite frankly, I was like, I have no idea. I'm about to leave school. Uh, Obviously, this is great doing these apartments, but it's very cyclical. Like, it was the summer, works out a lot better. In the winter, it's not as great. And I had, coming from an immigrant family, some things are not like, becoming an entrepreneur is kind of like the opposite ideology of like, you're supposed to be going to college and uh, having a very, very typical job. That's why we sacrifice to get you here. So he said, how about you come in and talk with us? I met with him and the director, the head of project services at the time, where it was like, hey, just come in and talk. And I kind of ended up leaving that room with an unofficial job offer, napkin sketched, made up the title on the spot together, what the role would kind of be like. And I chose to go from entrepreneur to intrapreneur, which for those people out there listening is an option. There are a lot of people that are looking to come into an organization and look at how things are being done. And that's how I kind of got started as the innovation manager for Consigli, where I was focused on reality capture, 360 cameras, drones, like, and as you can tell, I'm naming a lot of hardware, not problems that I was solving. So that led to my eventual gripe of, do you have a solution looking for a problem or a problem looking for a solution? I stayed in that role for about 2 years where I don't want to say I hit a ceiling, but once you implement reality capture on a lot of projects, you kind of get to a point of, as a company, are we looking to start doing research and development of things that aren't created yet? Or are we just looking to maintain and, stay within this wheelhouse, create a profitable project services sort of scenario? And I always had this yearning to want to go build. And the coolest people probably in the company to me, were the superintendents. They're the ones who got the truck. They're the ones who, when they walked in a room, everybody, kind of paid attention to. And I always admired that, and I wanted to go see what that was about. So I made, like you, Adam, the reverse, from technology to the field. So to me, that was probably the hands down best career decision I've ever made in my life. And for anybody that wants to go into any sort of technology role, even at a construction company, I highly, highly, highly suggest spend some time in the field, whether it's project engineer or assistant superintendent. Like, go out and actually get out there on site, because it's very hard to build solutions for people never having felt the experience, felt the actual pain.
Yeah, you're teasing us into the catalyst here.
Yeah.
It is pretty interesting. I wish a little time machine here in my shed, go back to you and that conversation with Jack, and like, what are you doing here, Brian? Like, what's your little baby face Brian over here just doing at this career? Like, did you know him, or did you know like the
No, it wasn't even a career fair. It was like other architects and general contractors from around Boston were there. They were all like materials design companies. The ABX conference is an architecture design, but I was in like the technology visualization cohort. So yeah, Consiglio had a booth where they were showing off their, like, what tech they had, and then I was showing off, what I was applying to the real estate industry, and how I wanted to kind of appeal more to the general contracting companies.
It is so.
We can talk. That decision in retrospect was amazing, because knowing what I know now of how hard it is to get on a job site when you're not working for the company is a different beast, where I was unloaded on, here's 90 projects ongoing. Like, you get to go walk on sites, and instantly people are going to have some sort of like loyalty that you work for the same company and you're not trying to sell them something that they don't need, and you're looking out for them.
Brian, that's a good little teaser here into kind of the second segment here of just like the catalyst. I don't before even diving into that, it is fascinating. Like, we kind of joke of like, oh, the Gen Z, the millennial, like, we all three really do have like a pretty different loyalist, Adam, curious, George over here, Grant, and then Brian, just the entrepreneurial, like, I'm just going to do whatever I do until someone tells me
iPod innovator. New tagline.
I was actually funny. I don't know why I'm off on this tangent. Can you imagine if we had ChatGPT to like make up our job titles back then? Like, what better creative ideas of the like names and roles that could have been. I was ChatGPTing over here. I couldn't remember like key releases for hardware and software like in the last 20 years, and it's pretty crazy. I mean, you think about, and I'm dating you even more, Adam. I'm just going to pile on here. Like 2007 is when like a lot of emergence of BIM happened, which is pretty fascinating. And then you start talking about like the 2010s, getting into like the iPad and drones coming out, and really just like this hardware kind of part. Anyway, it was just interesting kind of reading through some of this timeline over here of like, man, the last 20 years has been super fascinating. Like this dance of hardware, software, who's ahead of who, are they intersecting each other and like really causing a convergence? Anyway, the catalyst, let's get into it. Adam, when did you know, or when did that tipping point kind of happen of like, I'm going to start thinking of some other things here? I think we all kind of alluded to this idea, but yeah, just curious, and we'll go around the table again of just, yeah, what was your kind of catalyst moment and how did it kind of play out?
Yeah, my catalyst moment, very one distinct moment in time, but it sort of was a gradual buildup over, we'll call it 6, 7, 8 years from the end of that, that first job I was telling you guys about earlier, that really just put me through the ringer. It was a great job from the perspective of like I learned, I think, the most on any project on that first job. You tend to find the most learning opportunities in some of the worst case scenarios, and so that was it for me. And over the course of the next number of years, there was always this kind of like question in the back of my mind as I went from one job to the next. I did a data center project after the courthouse, small staff, design build, different delivery method. It was just constant learn, constant learn, constant learn. Put more information in, uh, apply more hours. Right. Key factor here is I need to learn more, so I'm going to spend more time of my time figuring it out so that I'm better tomorrow, right? I have that personality type of wanting to be the best, right? And so it's just try to learn the most as I could. Built a hospital next. That one was a quote unquote great opportunity that happened to be about a 5 hour round trip from my house. Did that for a year and a half, and you can imagine the grind of traffic every day, 10, 12 hours on site as a superintendent,
Where
3
the
hours
most
in.
gray hair came from. Let's just put it at that. We'll say that.
That's where the majority of the gray hair came in on that job. Yeah, listened to a lot of podcasts. There was a lot of time in the car, a lot of windshield time. They call that one. But it really did kind of, that was an interesting finish of that job, and that did boost me career wise, ladder wise, if you will, to more of a senior role for what would be the last project that I worked on at Turner there, which was really the first time that I had multiple direct reports, which is an interesting sort of catalyst piece where I realized on that last job that the longer I worked in the industry and the more seasoned and experienced and senior I became, the further away from the face of work, which is what I really loved, the further away from that face of work or the actual construction that I would be involved in, I was going to get, right? Because then my job is to mentor younger ones, younger individuals, younger engineers, younger superintendents, right? Make them better, build up the next crop behind us. And it took me away from what I really love, which is the technical problem solving of building. Ultimately why I got in the industry. So that was sort of a gradual realization over the last 3-4 years there. And I ultimately, the real very key moment for me, and we'll get a little personal here, is like I had my very first ever anxiety driven panic attack that ultimately, I mean, not super proud of it, but ultimately put me in the hospital. I thought I was having a heart attack. And it was like, that was a pretty big wake up call. I was spending more hours on the job site than I ever had, trying to do as much as I could, trying to be the best version of myself, the best professional version that I could. I was taking work home every night. It was a pretty unhealthy cycle I found myself in, all driving towards what I thought was greatness, right? What I thought was going to be, like an influence on my industry and be better builder and all those things. And, it ultimately took its toll on me health wise. So it was that sort of event that I'll call it, that really started having me look around at the industry and saying, I wonder what else is out there. And I started interviewing with some other companies. It was never a company problem. I'll be super clear about that. It was never a company problem. I've identified now over the last few years that it was a me problem. It was a culture. It was an industry problem that, there is this culture that just drives you into more work. And if you're an A player, if you're somebody that does well, there's more work for you when you're done with the work that you just took on. So I think that I hope a lot of people will resonate with that and understand that there's some boundaries to be set there. But at the point that I was interviewing with some other companies, I really did realize, and I think we talked about this, I don't remember if it was earlier in this episode or before this, but I came to the realization that, hey, it's the industry. It's just a different logo on my shirt, right? I'm going to have the same challenges wherever I go. And it was really, truly sort of whatever you believe in the universe, it was meant to be one of those things. I got a call from construction site, and I failed to mention that I was a customer of Struction Site on that last project. And so I built a relationship with the team there, with Brianna and Matt Daly and, just the group, and just super cool little startup. I think this is probably around the same time, Brian, that you maybe met Struction Site, and maybe Grant. We probably all met Struction Site right around the same time. And just built a relationship. And I randomly one day got a phone call from Brianna that said, "Hey, you want to come work here?" Like, I was, one that gave a lot of feedback.
What
being
year was
local. That was in 2021 was when I got that phone call to come to work at Struction Site. Yeah. But for the previous 3 years, they were brand new. Nate Anderson was employee number 2, I think, and he was my CSM. And, so I just had grassroots connections with this little company that, I won't expose the details of the deal, but ultimately when I was shopping for reality capture at the time, Struction Site was the one I wanted, and they quoted me the proper price, and I pulled my really egotistical Turner card and I said, "Hey, I think you guys need me more than I need you, so this is the price I'm gonna pay."
Man.
And they were like, "Yep, we'll take it." And
Did we
so
add that
I got
to another Gen X label there? I don't want to, just a hard negotiator. I also I'm profiling.
No. I can relate exactly to that specific negotiation tactics. I think it's a personality thing more than a generational thing.
So would you say that the kind of health related moment was like a tipping point, or the like initiator? Like where did it kind of sit in the like, hey, I really gotta like figure this thing out?
I think that the initiator, I like your words there. I think the initiator was kind of that realization that as I got further in my career, I was going to get further away from the construction piece, right? Like kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Like, I loved, I'm sick in the head sometimes. Like, I love submittals. Give me a set of structural steel shop drawings and walk away, leave me alone. Give me 10 cups of coffee and I'm going to hammer through. I'm going to find every welding detail and every connection in that doesn't work. I'm going to find every coordination issue with the other trades that connect to it. Like, that's my jam. That's what I love doing. And the further you get into your career, we have new hires to go through submittals, right? Like, that's what they're supposed to be doing, right? That's what the 2, 3, 4-year engineer is supposed to be doing, not the 10 to 12, 13-year superintendent. But that's what I loved. And so that was sort of like that initiating thought of like, oh man, the further I get into this, the further away from the work I'm going to get. And then obviously the health piece was really that trigger, that just like, we've used the word catalyst, right? That was the moment that I was like, damn, I got to do something different. I don't have a hobby. I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have I don't have anything going for me right now other than what I do at work. And it was kind of a sobering moment of what am I doing this for? And so that's really kind of where that thought process started.
Yeah, I think and maybe not to like profile the superintendent role, but that one is the hardest to separate. I sense the kind of identity to the life, right? Like, I don't know, and maybe I'm over my skis here in making that statement.
But Brian alluded to it earlier. I mean, his heart eye emoji face when the superintendent walked into the room, like, that's a real thing, right? When you're the superintendent on a job, whether you're the most senior or even just the superintendent in your area on a pod of certain scopes or whatever, like, you're the quote unquote general. Like, you are responsible ultimately. This is where I think a lot of like traditional superintendent thought process versus mine and some of the younger folks in the industry, like, I looked at myself. I never swung a hammer for Turner Construction. I never welded a dang thing. I didn't do any work, right? I had computer hands, but my job was to enable my subcontracting team, enable my trade partners to work, right? To just flow, right? Make the most money they can so that we can be successful in this project. And so I found myself really taking on and weighing all of the problems of the job that were 1 week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks out, that I had to come up with a problem or a solution before we had a problem in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where, you own that role. And if shit goes sideways in the field, that comes back to me. And
that like becomes your identity though. Like, I feel like, and again, because there's not,
No, the thing I'm going to say is, like, the best part and the worst part about that job is the concept of ownership. Like that one word, it is the
100%.
best skill you will ever learn. That there's no excuses for when things don't go right. It is my fault. It is 100% my fault. If somebody was in somebody else's way, great. Yeah, like they could have brought that up at the stand-up meeting, but it was my job to have thought that that was going to be ahead of
Did I
time.
schedule it correctly? Right? Like that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and
Just like
it's constantly like, what can I do more to make sure someone else can keep going? And also the concept of ownership. Oh, wow, we don't have a roof on the building yet. It's raining. Yes, it's Sunday night. I'm not like turning my brain off like, oh, let's go watch, whatever that new Netflix or HBO show is.
Ted
White
Lasso, I
Lotus.
get it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I'm not watching White Lotus, just like enjoying my day. Every time it rained, I had like a mini panic attack.
But do you
Well,
think
not
that's
only
just
that,
like standard?
I found myself squeegeeing decks on the weekends when it rained because they were my decks, right? Like you just had to plan for it.
Yeah, I don't know that, and again, I could be wrong and over my skis here. Like I think that role of superintendent is so hard to set up your life for balance. Like, how do you weave a job or project more so, and then how do you go home and be present with your family and or your hobbies or your life outside of the job site fence? Like, I don't know. I've been fortunate to work with some incredible superintendents that have great families and I've learned a ton. I mean, Adam, you've met a handful of them. We've done this show many times before and interviewed them, So, but boy, I think of the roles, like the work-life balance has got to be the hardest from a superintendent perspective. Like,
yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, I don't think we want to take this episode down a full, like, sort of mental health, awareness road, which I think is a perfectly viable topic for another discussion. But I completely agree with you that, yeah, superintendent, there's also a weird element of like, as an engineer, you can review submittals at night, right? As a superintendent, when the job shuts down at 4 p.m., like I can't continue making progress unless we're working overtime, right? Unless we bring in another shift. And like then the progress continues. But there's a weird thing that I realized at night where it was like, Brian, to your point, like my brain is spinning. I'm trying to figure out what tomorrow is going to be and how to make tomorrow better than today and try and be in front of everything. So yeah, Grant, I mean, I think I'll put a pin in my story here and say that the realization that I was going to get away from what I loved and just that balance of work life, health, all those things is kind of where my catalyst point, the ultimate catalyst point. And I'll shout her out again, Brianna Williams, man. If I hadn't gotten that phone call, I don't know where I'd be today. Yeah,
it's crazy. I think the interwoven theme through a lot of this, each of our stories, is not only just like moments, but people, which I think could also be its own kind of highlight of sorts in that kind of realm. So yeah, I think again, a similar kind of vibe of like, so I came out of school, was like used to 4 internships of 3 months a piece. And it was like, oh, this is great. Like, I love these little 3-month, stints. I can get in, figure some stuff out, leave at the end of the day. And the first job I had, or the first project out of school, so I landed at one of the companies I interned with, which was awesome and really excited to kind of start. And it was a 3-year job, which was, 10 times longer than a normal internship for me. And this was 2011. So, you go back to 2011, 12, 13, what happened to the 3 years of the tech side? That was, iPad coming out. That was Bluebeam starting to take off. That was, BIM 360 and Vela, like trying to get, more tech tools in a mobile sense, out in the field. And what's funny is like, really through my internships, I wouldn't say that I was exposed to the tech side of construction. It was, it's 3 months. So you get in, you check all your internship boxes, and then you're, doing your summer eval form, and you're back to school. But yeah, this job, it was a dorm complex for a university down here in Dallas. And it was like the biggest project in their school history. And I was an RA in college, so it was cool to like work on a set of dorms, and was like, this is cool. Like I was excited to like get started. And you guys know me, I can get excited about genuinely anything. And yeah, I
I
was
would
just
have loved to see you as an RA. I think I would
Yeah,
have hated you
I,
for
we
on
need
the
a whole
floor.
episode on that one. I used to terrorize my RA, so
dude.
I'm sure this kind of makes a lot of sense.
It was great. I mean, not meme Ted Lasso worthy, but I mean, I had some good isms and sayings in that. I was all right for 3 years, which kudos to that. It was like a great paying way through college. Anyway, so it was cool. It was cool to be on a project that, you know, I think I had some little attachment to, of like, oh, this is cool. I get to build that opportunity for students at this university. And yeah, it was basically a dirt to furniture job. I showed up, and we had leveled kind of a neighborhood of homes to make way for this kind of complex, and it was crazy. I remember, you know, project engineer, and they gave me the kind of the structural and finishes work, and you guys are, man, this is embarrassing, but a big part of the story. Like, you say you love shop drawings and like enjoyed reading that, like, dude, that was so hard for me, because like even in an internship, I was like, what are these? Like, this is, so you're telling me that they send this for me to review it, and then I gotta like mark it up as if I know what I'm talking about, and then they're gonna like fabricate this stuff and like deliver it to a job site, and like my name's gonna be written on it because I have reviewed it. I was like, this is no, I don't know what that's gonna look like, but as a, like the structural component of reviewing this stuff, I was looking at rebar shop drawings, and I know there's probably someone on here that I worked with back in the day listening that,
Foreign language.
dude, no joke. I went up to Hobby Lobby and I bought these pipe cleaners, and I like was trying to like build this rebar cage of what this like tower crane foundation was, and these grade beams and these like piers. I was like building them with pipe cleaners, and I like was like embarrassed enough that I like had them in my desk, because I was like, I hope no one comes over here and sees these like, Brian, you know what a pipe cleaner is, right? I see your face over there, and you're like,
Yeah, no, I'm just like, the worst part about that scenario is the word embarrassed.
oh, dude, I was super embarrassed. I was like,
Yeah. I'm just like feeling for that, because it's just so funny. Like, the concept of like not knowing something is embarrassing.
I mean,
But
it was like,
yeah, like it's
I mean,
just
I
sad.
knew I like needed to understand it, because, you know, I was obviously like putting my name and stamp on these things, and it was just interesting to me, because it was kind of this idea of like, all right, I'm in the real world. There's no like going back to school in 3 months. Like, I'm cutting my teeth on this thing, and I think I really just started to kind of understand like the inefficiencies of construction. Like, you talk about submittals and you talk about RFIs. Like, this project had 5 typical buildings. So, I mean, this was pre PDFs, and like we printed, you know, sets of drawings and would leaf in and stamp and like earmark, you know, these literal paper drawings. And I'm like, dude, something about this is like, am I the only one that's seeing this as like super inefficient? And of course, I'm the greenhorn out of school, and everyone's also like laughing at me, like, look at this kid. Like, he thinks that this is like, you know, not easy. And of course, it's, you know, we're doing this stuff in the real world. And I think I was just like, that first kind of 6 to 9 months out of really on this job, I was like, something seems off here. Like, either I didn't realize this in the 3 months of my internships, or, you know, this just, I wasn't like exposed to it. And I think what was interesting is, again, you kind of talk about the hardware and software that was like coming out at the time. Like, I remember falling in love with Bluebeam. I was like, this is to your love for Microsoft Paint. Like, I was like, dude, this thing is awesome. Like, I'm marking up stuff. I'm like communicating. I'm doing hyperlinks and making, you know, OCR and all these things in a PDF. And I remember like I bought our first iPad because I took the invoice from our print shop and said like, stop sending money to them. Let me go buy this iPad. And Bluebeam came out with their, you know, iPad app in like 2013, and was like getting the whole team hyped and excited about just using these kind of new ways of mobility out on a job. And it was just awesome. It was just this like really cool mix of, all right, I love this industry. I hate its inefficiencies, but I love tech. Like, I love these like problems being solved really quickly. And yeah, I mean, this was like 2014 too, when this, you know, new drone came out, and like, it was crazy. I remember like, again, took the invoice of our man lift that we were doing inspections on these roofs, and just told my project manager, I was like, hey, like, we're spending $1,500 to like rent this man lift for like a week. Can I go like use that to go buy this again at this hobby store that was right up the road? And he's like, I mean, I guess, like, if you want to try that out. And I was just worried. I was like, I'm going to crash this thing because I don't know what this is going to, do. I'm not a drone expert, but I was just like, it seems to make sense on paper. So let's go, kind of figure this thing out. And I say all that is like, this is like 3 of the 10 years that I was out in the industry. But I think what it really taught me was kind of my catalyst moment was like, all right, again, there's like really high inefficiencies. There's really unique, opportunities with technology and hardware and software to like solve these things. And there's people that I think could be really benefited from these workflows and tools. And similar to your story, Adam, like I remember looking at my project manager and thinking like, do I want to do that? Like he was an amazing project manager, still know him today. And he's, just, I would say a great mentor. And like, I just remember thinking like, man, I don't know that I can do what he's doing. And after that job, he was like, hey, do you want to go to like another, 2 to 3 year project, or do you want to go into kind of a corporate role and, help more teams? Because, there were projects from all over the Metroplex coming to our job and like, hey, how are you using this stuff? Like, what's the value here? How are you guys, doing all this stuff? And it was awesome. Like, I just remember thinking like, I think I want to go help more projects more so than just go and cut my teeth on another job. And yeah, ultimately the catalyst moment was, I think, looking at my project manager and saying, hey, like I'm gonna move into this corporate role. And there's a whole maybe catalyst moment kind of within that, 7 years after that mark. But yeah, I definitely wasn't approached like you, Adam, by a software company. Like I wasn't, tapped on the shoulder. I would argue to say like I was very much hoping that would be the case of like, oh, I'm, tinkering around and doing all this stuff. Would someone like come notice me enough to like ask me to come work with them? And man, I kind of had some darker, harder seasons in there of like wishing that would happen. And I think ultimately that just led for, me to dive deeper and get more entrenched into corporate stuff that I really am thankful I understand now and kind of the inner workings of things. And it led me to really work closer with a colleague in the team that we had kind of been building up over time. And so, yeah, it was just interesting how that job kind of had the project had a catalyst moment. And then on the corporate side, the catalyst moment was really just like, hey, I think I want to like pursue this. Like, I think I want to kind of understand what, roles are out. I didn't even know job titles. I didn't even know like companies that would, check or, fit the bill to like what I wanted to kind of be a part of. But I just knew, I was like, man, there's something here that I think I'd be really interested to kind of go and discover. And ultimately, landed where I'm at. And I can unpack a little bit more of that, but my segment time here is a little long. So yeah, it was just interesting. I think to summarize it too, Adam, your point, like just seeing, I think the path ahead and realizing like, I don't know if that's where my skill set is like best matched. And I get asked all the time, like, would I go back into construction and go back down that route, which I'll tease for the next segment here. And kind of the grass is the grass greener segment. But yeah, it was just an interesting kind of dynamic that I think eventually led me to being where I'm at here.
It's a cool trajectory. And I think we had similar, we've put our heads together and laughed a little bit on our similar initial drone experiences. I had a very similar one with my first project as well. Project manager like, hey, go buy a drone. And my number one concern was, I think I'm going to crash this into the building and seriously injure and or shut our job down. It's fun.
It's cool. There's some fun like family stuff in there too. Of like my dad was really the one that kind of like got me excited about drones and what they could do. And I remember going back and like showing my project manager at the time. I was like, hey, I think these things could actually help us, like just this idea and love of like looking at what other industries were doing and trying to kind of see how that could be applied. I mean, the iPad wasn't made for construction, right? Like a drone wasn't made for construction. And yet those are still 2 pretty influential tools in this industry. And I think just like getting a taste or an appetizer of like what that looked like was just really cool. Like I like the idea of applying other things into this industry and how it could kind of benefit from it. So yeah.
Maybe one more serious note too. And Brian kind of called it out on the embarrassed piece. What's interesting about the construction industry and the way the culture is set up, like as you were explaining, you're trying to figure out rebar shop drawings and buying pipe cleaners to like model it for yourself, like that mindset, that ingenuity, I'll call it, that like drive is something that the industry, like I recruit for that. Like, I'm trying to find people who would do the same thing that you did, that you were trying to teach yourself in a better, more meaningful way. And then ultimately, as those people get further in their career, those are the ones that end up taking on more and more work, because you're just driven to figure it out. Like, the way the industry holds everybody accountable is, it brings out the best in people. And I would argue that pipe cleaner scenario is, I mean, it's an incredible quality that you possessed at that point in time to try and teach yourself exactly what it is you needed to know. So,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
guess long story short, just commending you on that piece.
well, I mean, and kudos to the superintendent that I was with, because he was kind of overseeing that scope of work, and he could see I was struggling. Like, he was like, "How did you not learn this in school?" And he obviously had built tons of. And the other part too is like, I moved down here from Iowa, and I didn't have any idea of like the structural systems and the foundation systems that were built down here. Like, I didn't even know what a pier was, and like, I was like, guys, I had basements and like, footings and foundation walls. Like, I couldn't tell you what the hell a pier was. It goes down like 30 feet, like 2 feet wide. It was just concepts to me that, again, like, school never really, I mean, it can, and it certainly does prepare you in some ways, but it was just this very like, oh, I'm in the real world now, fellas. Like, I gotta go to Home Depot or go to, Hobby Lobby and pick up some pipe cleaners to figure this thing out. So anyway, just a funny, weird story on that. But Mr. Brian, let's transition to you, friend. What you kind of teased us with your catalyst moment of like, all right, now I'm going back out to the field, and I've kind of learned at least the like innovation side. I want to go out to be a superintendent. But yeah, like what out in that kind of moment maybe triggered the move or the thought, at least, to say, hey, like, maybe the software side or the tech side is where I want to land.
So it actually was never intentional. It happened as a result, and I will kind of get into that. But no, I think you brought up a great point of having had the technology going into the field. There were certain scenarios where I'm like, why are we doing it this way? Right? Like, there was this. We had three little mini roofs aside from the main roof on the last building I was on, and one of them was only accessible from a boom lift, like an 80-foot fully extended boom lift in the back. Is like one of these like little cutesy architectural details where it's like, great, how are we going to flash this, right? And I was like, great, like, instead of bringing a boom lift all the way over there, setting it up every single day just to go check on progress, why don't we just fly a drone and take photos, or use a 360 camera of whoever's up there? And I had my waterproofers go up there, and I was like, hey, when you're up there, take a 360 photo so we can see the progress, right? Because those little roofs always have issues later on down the line. But pretty much my breaking point was, uh, my girlfriend always wanted to move to New York City, right? And I was ride or die Boston my entire life, and I never thought I'd actually ever leave the city. But in retrospect, now I'm grateful that her pretty much giving me the ultimatum of, look, I've waited for you saying that we're going to keep moving to New York City. We're going to keep moving to New York City after the next project, after the next one. And I got to the end of what eventually ended up being the final one, where I was kind of told that, they had acquired a company out there, and I was going to start, I was going to go move to that office, etc. And pretty much at the end of that project was told, hey, we actually want you to go to this other project. Uh, I know we told you that you were going to be going to New York, but we actually want you to do something else. And that was now an hour and a half away. It's a great opportunity. You'll learn a lot. You'll be able to kind of be in charge of this complete lab fit out. And it was a great opportunity, but not for what I wanted in my personal life. And so I kind of had to, I had to stand on business and say, look, I'm sorry. Thank you for the opportunity, but here's my notice, like, as of today. Uh, and I had a rolling meeting actually with Struction Site. So I actually brought on Struction Site and DroneDeploy in 2018 to Consigli on when I was on the tech side. At the time, it was maybe 6 people, right? Like, yeah, Nate Anderson was a CSM, Mike Koski was just getting hired on, and I would call him every day and kind of like onboarding in the pains of what's going on in the field. And same story, you know, beat him up on pricing, stuff like that. It all comes full circle, but it was great because I had the standing meeting with Matt Daly, and I pretty much coincidentally had a call that week, and I was like, "Hey, do you know any GCs hiring in New York? I just kind of put in my notice, and I'm looking to go over to any other. I'll take any role, PE, uh, you know, assistant super, anything. Like, just I just need to go there." Because this has been something I've been promised to my partner for a very long time, and I kind of strung her along. But he said, "How about coming over to the tech side?" And I was like, "What? Why would I do that? What could I possibly do for that company?" Like, I couldn't imagine being on that side of the fence. And he gave me 3 options. So he was like, "You could think about going into product management, you could think about going into sales, or you could think about going into marketing." And I had a meeting with Bree, which I really know super well up until that point. And she like we were having some initial talks, but they weren't necessarily they were trying to hire someone more senior at the time. So to prove myself in the classic "let me figure it out" way, she like recommended a small book in passing, like in the first conversation. So I read that book over the weekend, the entire book cover to cover over the weekend, and I met with her maybe 2 days later. And I was like, "Hey, I finished the product management book. Like, will you like what are your thoughts?" And I think I kind of spooked her out a little bit. She was like, "What?" And it's just so funny because that's just the mentality of like just punch through things. And but she was like, "Look, we don't really have that, but let's eventually transition you in sales." Knowing what I know about sales now, that would have been a very very good opportunity. But at the time, everybody thinks about sales as like snake oil salesman. In reality, I have such a better appreciation for what a salesperson can do and can like help out a company. And for those listening, I used to be the person that turned off the camera and just absolutely like tried to fight my salesperson every single time. And now realizing how much better I could have even been off if I've actually just worked with them, because they want to be your friend. They make money off selling you things, but they're not there to like you need to succeed for them to succeed. So that's a little anecdote. So then I was like, you know what? Let me try out this marketing thing. I get to just join the team and kind of rant, and maybe they build something for it. And it kind of ended up working out where I had more of an appreciation for. Uh, Grant, you said something pretty interesting. So there in entrepreneurship, there's the term there is working in the business and then working on the business, right? It's really difficult to do both. Uh, and I think working on the business as far as like innovation and changing the industry is something that I found more appealing as well. Like coming from a place of I felt that pain, but also I want to impact as many lives as possible to not have to go through as many hurdles or hoops, is what kind of drew me into it. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll just kind of end there. That's kind of my story.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is even the transition from like a job to more of a project to more of a corporate role. I think often doesn't get maybe the attention or kind of importance that it could. Really, just because it's like how many people that just finished up a job, they're like, "Oh, I'm tired, I'm done, I'm ready to move on and kind of step away from it." But really, the balance of like what is it like out on a project and what is it like in a corporate setting is, I think, like looking back, so vital in just understanding the roles and the challenges and the dynamics of like, what does it look like to run a project and what does it look like to run a corporate company? Like it is so different from each other, yet they have, I think, just their own kind of unique challenges to have success be viable and have impact be made at the different levels of the org. But yeah, it is interesting, Brian. I think not overlooking one of those is like you're only getting half the equation. Like if you made a move after you were on a project and never got to understand like the corporate side of it, I think you'd be probably looking backwards and being like, maybe that was maybe a missing piece. Or if you're at a corporate sense and you're like, I've never been out on a job. I never like sat in a job site trailer for like 2 years. And you'd probably look back and be like, that feels like a missing piece. So like, it's interesting that those two things I think do play a pretty big role in a holistic experience background maybe. And I don't know if tech companies or whatever look at that, but I definitely think that could be something to hit on. So I want to move us into really the last part of this, which is, I think, some of the most interesting questions and dynamics, because this is really why we thought and discussed this. Is like, oh, fellas, how's the grass? Is it always greener? Let's talk and camp a little bit on like looking backwards and what do we wish we would have known? I mean, I got probably 10 questions lined up over here of like things that I've heard, like common questions that I think get asked of like, oh, it must be so nice. Man, you, Adam, you're, in Phoenix today and, Reno tomorrow. And Brian, man, it must be nice sipping on your coffee over there. I see you in a nice little office space. You must enjoy your remote work over here. I hear those questions and like feedback all the time. And I think hopefully this segment of kind of this conversation can, I don't know, cut right through those perceptions. Cause I don't know, fellas, we can dive into it, but just like,
I want to, before we brush too far over it, because I like where you're headed, but what I want to say is that what's interesting about this next piece and why the three of us, have all sort of gotten to the point that we're at right now is only because of the previous experience, right? None of us, aside from, Brian's tinkering with iPods, 15 years ago, whatever it was, none of us come from a computer science, coding, engineering, sales, right? Like marketing, like none of us, the three of us, come from any like core function of the business that we work for today. And if I can, Grant, this is kind of a segue into like the like, why did Struction Site at the point that they hired me? Why did they hire me? And really the role that I took on at the beginning was as a solutions engineer, which really is fancy way of saying an internal consultant or a construction SME for our go-to-market team. Which
you got to phrase your acronyms here. I remember how bad the acronyms are on the construction side. What the hell is an SME?
Yeah. Well,
what's an SE? What's an SME? ABC? Like, come on, just let it out there.
All right. SE, solutions engineer, basically the technical person on the sales team that can speak construction, can speak software, understands how our product technically applies to an end user's actual problem on a day-to-day basis. So
who would you relate them to on the construction side?
That's a tough one. I mean, kind of like a project engineer, right? Like you're the one that understands the nuts and bolts of the particular trade or the particular solution. Is kind of the way I would go to. I've never really drawn that parallel before.
Quality control director.
Yeah, somewhere in there. There's probably some expertise. It's definitely a very different role than anything in construction, though. I'll say that. Yeah. SME is in the, I would say, broader world subject matter expert. So when you get hired over, I got hired over here. It was like we talked about the company size at that point. I think I was employee like 28 or 30, somewhere in there, and everyone on the staff at that point, save the founder Philip and Brianna, pretty much everybody else was from software in some capacity, and we didn't have a lot of construction experience on the team. And so I sort of slotted in and filled that role. And I mean, to the extent that Friday mornings, and Brian, I think I was still doing it when you got hired, was like construction 101. And it was an open office hours where I would have an open Zoom meeting that everybody in the company was invited to. And if you wanted to come and listen to whatever the heck I had to talk about for an hour that morning, ask questions, people would throw out topics weeks prior, and I would sort of lecture on those to try and educate our staff on how to be more in tune with what our end users needed and what they cared about on a daily basis. Because that's really where I came from. That was the only value that I felt I brought to the company, was my resume. And so that was sort of the segue in. And what the point I wanted to make is that each of us comes from industry, and Phil's has had to find our way into the roles that we're in today. And so there isn't like a direct one-to-one, hey, I worked in construction on this thing, I would fit into that role at a tech company. If you're in that bucket of people that are looking to make that move or thinking about, switching some things up.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself like not being tapped on the shoulder, like your guys' kind of story. Like I was having to like research. I don't even know what to apply for. Like, I don't even know what roles are out there. I mean, I now know what these roles are now, of like, what's a business development representative, applied for those. Couldn't tell you what that was, but I'm tossing my name in the hat. Or and I didn't even know what APAC was. And honestly, if you don't know what that means, you're not any less for it. Apparently, it means Asia Pacific. Didn't know that. EMEA, cool acronym. Couldn't tell you what that means either. But I think it's just fascinating of like that. It kind of felt almost like a pipe cleaner moment for me of just like I was curious about this other opportunity or moving into this other industry. And yet I was faced with like, I have no idea what these terms, roles, job descriptions, any of that means. And I mean, just, I think each of us kind of mentioned this of like a mentor, like having someone that you could just openly ask questions to and be like, dude, I don't know what any of these are. And it's so funny now of like, we kind of chuckled about ChatGPT, like that can almost be your like knowledge base or resource to like ask it questions and like give it curiosities and have it find you, jobs and openings right now. But I didn't have any of that. Like I was reaching out to individuals. So it is just interesting how I wouldn't just camp out on ChatGPT. Like I'd for sure go talk to some people in roles, whether it's, us or other people too. But, I was looking at some of the different demographics of what a startup is, because I didn't even know what a startup was. Like, does a startup mean it's software, or like, does a startup mean it's like employee size? And I did find it interesting, like startup, I guess, obviously the term of it is like, hey, there's a typical startup has like 7 employees, right? So that's like by definition, a company that's just getting started, initial size, has an idea and concepts of, funding that applied to their kind of idea. But, Drone Deploy, we're 300 plus company, size, and that's obviously not startup land. And I think that's also interesting too, is people are like thinking or considering who and what company may fit an interest profile for them and, tenure and things like that. But I want to get back to some of these like questions though, of like, Brian, what questions have you gotten asked the most of, hey, like, what's it like over there? Like, hey, I'm thinking about moving. Like, see you posting a lot and getting 1 million views on videos over here. Like, what did you do? Like, what do you do? Or like, just kind of aggregate some of the questions you feel like you hear the most.
I mean, I'd start with, what parts are actually greener and then what parts are not. How about that?
I mean, it's only greener where you water it. So, I mean,
I would say the greener parts is the fact that you get to see the inner workings of so many contractors around the world, right? Like you get to visit projects and you get to see and meet people that are the top of the top in every company, right? Like everybody, all the rock star supers, all the rock star technology, man. Like,
but I would argue it's harder to get on jobs. I mean, I agree that the breadth of opportunity is there, but just because that opportunity is there doesn't mean that you're visiting all those jobs all the time.
No, absolutely not. You're definitely more removed from the day to day. And yes, you do get to see a job site maybe through some rose colored glasses of great. Yeah. Like, yes, there's a lot of work to do here, but I'm not the one that has to make sure it gets done as much as it's understanding the problems of what they're dealing with and how we can kind of help out. But on the,
that I think is the key piece though, to your point though, about like your previous life in construction. If you had left prior to getting any field experience, you wouldn't know how to apply the tech, right? So it's a very similar role now, where having been in that seat, having felt the pain, now in a tech role, in tech capacity, you have the ability to speak to that project team and say, hey, this is really what I feel our product would be suitable for in this scenario.
1,000%. And sometimes it's just knowledge exchange of how to use something a different way. Like above ceiling 360 photos, for some reason, I still tell people in the pre-con side, is mind blowing to them. Like, great, I thought we were going to have to laser scan. Like, yes, you may still have to do that when you're going into the 3D coordination, but majority of the teams that need to access those photos don't have computers that run, E57 files, or don't have recap where they can open a lot of these larger laser scans. Like, yeah, your modeling team is going to appreciate that, but just sticking a 360 camera above, some ceiling tile with the light is going to help out a ton and does not take as much time. But on the grass is not always greener side, I'd say you wake up in the field side with one job, which is make sure that building gets built. anything on the outside is not as much of a concern. So your role, like what a project engineer does, what an APM does, what a PM does, is all very clearly defined. In a startup, that's not always the case. You may have to wear many hats. You may be doing things that you're like, does this even fall under my like my job description? And you're like, wait, what was my job description? Right. And
Yeah, it's all
the one
hands
you
on
made
deck.
up, right?
yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, the one I made up that I didn't clearly define as well as maybe I could have. But it's fine, because if you like the ambiguity, like to me, that I love figuring out the path out of whatever I need to do to get to that end point. But like that being said, when people want to go work for a tech company, the stage of company matters a lot. Some earlier stage
Yeah.
companies don't even know who their ideal customer profile, aka ICP, is, right? Everybody wants to appeal to the top 40 ENR general construction companies, but they're not like an enterprise ready software, so they end up shifting somewhere else. And maybe next month it goes another direction. Oh, we're only going to target general contractors in this region under 200 employees. Great, that's a completely different product skill, like product type. Talk track, sales has to get retrained on that. So things can constantly be changing, and the ambiguity, it's not just like you get a laptop and now you're sitting on the beach having a mojito every day. It's you're still waking up and finding a new set of problems. They just may not be. It's just a different set of problems. That's what it is.
Do you think
But
people
problem
like
solving,
thrive
problem
in
solving
that?
is the root of it.
Do you think people thrive in that ambiguity though? Like, do you think some people that see that from afar, like what are the misconceptions about it? Because I certainly agree there is a lot of ambiguity in, well, the three of our roles that we do to on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes that ambiguity is good. And some people, it's like, nah, man, I got to build this building, furniture's got to go in by this date, and that's the goal. Like, we can all rally around that. And like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes ambiguity is like kind of illustrious of like, ooh, that sounds like interesting and exciting. And it's like, I don't know, tell me the last time you were in an ambiguous moment and you thrived.
I mean, like I think it's like, let's just talk about like product management and creating new features or like you're kind of taking risks. And I think you put it best in the analogy of like quarterbacks throw the ball where the wide receiver is going, not where they're at. So you almost have to anticipate the direction of where someone's going. And either you're right or wrong. And there's not much room for forgiveness, because the market will tell you exactly if you're moving the right way or wrong way. And they tell you with their dollars, not their mouths, ahead of time. Right. And that's where you see churn, or that's where you see upticks.
You guys
But
explain churn though too. I feel like I need my
churn is when
little.
a customer, yeah, yeah, yeah. Churn is when a customer leaves, like straight out.
There it
I
is.
want to combine.
Guys, that was
I
my
want to
triangle.
combine
Did you hear that?
two things that you guys are talking about, which the ambiguity piece, Grant, that you're hitting on. Brian, I'm glad you brought up product. One of the stops along my little content career path in the last 4 years was a stint in product. And coming from the position of construction where it's like structured, it's, to your point, Brian, there's a job description. I know what my role is. I know how to build stuff. I can do it faster, bigger, better, stronger, whatever the feeling is there. And then to your point, Grant, about ambiguity, the product manager role at a tech company is very different than project manager, which is what we're all familiar with. And in the product manager role at a tech company, you are very much beholden to the bandwidth of your engineering team to execute, right? And so the metaphor that I've come up with, the analogy I've come up with, is that in construction, we have a defined scope, which is that building, we have a defined timeline, and we scale our resources to get it done, right? In software, we have a defined set of resources, which is our engineering team. We have a defined scope, we have a defined scale, which is like a quarterly release time. And then we scale scope down, right? Which for me, as the control freak, the one that wants to like take all the ambiguity out, like, hey, this is the $1 million idea, let's go build it. Well, we can only build like 10% of that to start with. And we need to do this in an iterative process so that our customers go on that journey with us and tell us continuously that we're going the right direction. Man, what a tough tough transition for my brain, who just wanted to hit the ground running and go build great products. It's like, well, there's a process to this. And so I was humbled pretty quickly in the product role for sure.
I think what's interesting too is, go for it, Brian.
No, I was going to say, and Adam, I think something that isn't spoken about that hit me with a nice slice of humble pie was the concept of documentation and like rolling out an idea, not just going into it, right? Like the amount of retrospective looks throughout the process of everything is so important in the startup world. Like writing down what was the like lessons learned, and I think sometimes in construction, I personally didn't feel a lot of the retrospectiveness or like how can we improve a process until towards the end of a project, and okay, great, we'll do it better on the next one.
Yeah. Words that I didn't know before joining a construction company or a construction tech. Retro, like what's a retro? Yeah. Like I never said that or heard it in construction. Like, oh yeah, we look back and figure out what we didn't do well and what we need to do better and Didn't do that before.
Yeah, I'd also find it interesting too. So I'm coming up on 3 years here next month in tech. Adam, you're at 3.5, 4?
I'll be 4 in April.
And Brian, you'll be 3-ish with me. Is that?
I always check LinkedIn.
He's looking at his calendar. I get it. I think
3 years and 2 months.
Okay, so 3 and 4. What's fascinating? How many different roles, and roles is asterisk and air quotes here as we talk about it, but like, how many different roles have you had in that 3 to 4 year time? I'm counting on my head. I've probably had 2 distinct titles, 4 distinct roles. I don't know if you guys, again, titles and role are kind of ambiguous in the sense, but
I've gone through 4 distinct roles, and I've made up the title for the last one. But what's interesting, what I find interesting is I've gone through 3 departments. I went from go-to-market sales to product to marketing. So it's been very interesting.
So you said 4 titles, 3 departments. Brian, what?
1 department, 2 titles, but construction site having been a much smaller startup.
Yeah.
You were kind of in like, I was kind of in solution. I was like half solutions engineering, like working on actual sales, but also in marketing. So like go to market period is where I
all right, that's another acronym I feel like we got to camp on. What the hell does that mean to
go to market? Go to market is the function of the organization that is responsible for either creating demand or selling or closing deals. I guess maybe that's the unofficial.
Are there like departments that make up that?
It's like sales, marketing. That's for the most sales,
customer experience.
That's customer experience. Like,
I mean, that was even another thing of like, I was trying to equate departments from construction to tech. Like, of course, there's HR that'll translate over, but it's like operations. Is that really like sales in technology, right? And then like customer experience, they don't really have like a translatable department to construction. And then you think about product, well, they don't really have it's just interesting.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know that there's it's funny. I've thought about this too. It's like we are in the construction tech industry, the 3 of us at this job. We're in a different industry, right? Like we're in the tech industry, whereas we left construction. We just happened to find our sweet spot, which is construction tech. It's just that our customers are the people that we used to be, right? Our friends in the industry still. But we are, so I don't know that I'm equipped necessarily to draw a good parallel between the different departments, and it's really tough depending on what it is you're trying to go into.
Yeah, well, I think that's what made it so tricky for me the first, I don't know, kind of research moment. And I was like, wait, so this role is like this person and this department is like that department. Like it just didn't work. And I feel like
there's no one-to-one because each business is designed to do a very different thing. Like startup is meant for very specific, like completely different use cases of what we're like. One's creating a software, which, doesn't require people physically on multiple sites. Like it's all one centralized nucleus. I feel like construction companies you have all these individual projects that almost run as their own little like cities or their own little governments. And it all pushes up to something that is like feeding those to get those people going.
Yeah, I want to get to some other questions of either misconceptions or thoughts. I really want to play that video I sent y'all last night about working remote. Let's camp from a remote standpoint too. We're all sitting in our different offices, not job site trailers, not corporate offices. Like, grass greener, fellas? Like, I mean, Adam, you can probably start here of just the difference of a 5-hour drive to a trailer or 5-hour round trip to a trailer, and like, I don't know, what's y'all's take?
Yeah, I think that you know, I'm going to take the liberty to say that I've probably embraced the remote life maybe the most out of at least my colleagues in terms of, the tech world these days. I spent the first 6 weeks or so at this 100% completely remote job at construction site in my living room in Sacramento, and started to feel like, ugh, I'm tired, I'm sick, I'm depressed. What's wrong with me? And it's like, I hadn't left the house. Like I hadn't needed to leave the house. I literally would get out of bed, I would shower, I'd walk 12 feet to my desk, I'd sit down and I'd work for 10, 12 hours I'm still on the hamster wheel of construction, right? I'm putting in all the hours I can. I'd go back, I'd shower, I'd get back in bed and I'd go to sleep. And it's like wash, rinse, repeat, until I realized, like, oh, I am 100% remote. I quote unquote work from home, WFH. I can work wherever I can connect to the internet. And so that next day I went to Starbucks, and sure as shit, I managed to get all my stuff done. I was on all my meetings, and I was at Starbucks. And then the next day I was like, I can stretch this. I'm going to go to the park. And I sat in the park for a day on a hotspot on my phone. I was like, hey, that works too. And so for me, that has evolved into a small trailer that I traveled around the country and worked from. I'm now sitting in my van life studio, podcast studio here in the middle of Phoenix, where, I'm far away from my home base up in Reno, South Lake Tahoe area. But I mean, quintessentially, I was able to sell my house, change my lifestyle completely, and focus on what the problem was that I left, right? We left off on my catalyst moment of personal well-being and health and all of that. Like, I've spent the last 4 years just becoming a healthier person, and ultimately it's been enabled by this remote work life. Now, with all of that said, I've tried to recruit in a number of people from my, past life in construction. And there's a bunch of people out there who have, Grant, you're one of them, right? You got 2 little kiddos running around. You got a wife at home. Like, you can't just up and leave in a van one day. And so it's everyone has some scale of what this remote life means to them and how they can either embrace it, take advantage of it, or maybe it's just moving to a different room.
And there he goes, down by the river. We'll wait for him to get back.
All right.
See, and just
Perfect
like
segue. Perfect segue into some of the challenges that come with remote work life. Is your connectivity is not always perfect.
Yeah, and just as we were talking about remote, Adam pops out, and in the value of editing and what we can do here, he's magically back in. No, I think it's an interesting point. I would say it was a part of a catalyst for me of, hey, what would moving into a tech role, different company, a working remote lifestyle like look like for our family? And I'm just going to start with some of the cons. Like, I miss going into an office. I miss, rubbing elbows next to someone and talking about Reddit threads and the latest whatever of the world, what's going on. And yeah, I definitely, and I knew going into it, I mean, you guys both know I'm a pretty social guy that can talk to just about anyone. And I think that was going to be a big challenge, but I definitely saw the pros of like, hey, like, I don't have to drive 45 minutes into an office and not know if anyone's going to be there, that day, and be on Zoom meetings and then drive 45 minutes back home and, miss some time with the kiddos, or, our kids are both under 3 years old. And it's like, man, that's a sweet season to walk into the house, and that's my drive, and that is a pro. But then a con is like, I just can't walk out on job sites anymore. Like the logistics of like going out and interacting with end users and folks, like, it just looks different. Like it requires more time and more relational equity with folks. And, I enjoy going to, office activities and things like that, again, is like a con, but the pro of like, hey, I can, sit here and do things like this. And, if I need to hop out or take a meeting in a remote sense, like can do that too. So it's interesting. I think you bring up a good point of kind of the different ends of the spectrum of like, it obviously has to understand or work within the lifestyle in which you're kind of in. And yeah, it's just interesting. I would say that a lot of people perceive working remote is a pro positive. And I would just say like, it's a pro positive in different aspects of life. And it totally depends on the life stage in which you're probably in, to consider it if it is. But I've had people ask, I think it's on this bottom ticker here of like, would you go back? Like, would you go back into construction? I'm like, I don't know. Those pros of being in an office are pretty cool. You know, like I miss those things. And I think those are things that also, I knew going into it would be giving up in a way, but, yeah, Brian, I guess what's your take on, you're not in a van by a river and you don't have 2 little kiddos at home. So, you're somewhere kind of probably in the middle of that.
I mean, I think the biggest change, and I'll go back to it, it's being able to impact more companies and also working with companies that are willing to want to change. Like, not I know people give the construction industry overall uh, a lot of slack on, maybe they're the least willing to change, but I haven't really encountered as much of that. Um, Maybe the pace that maybe everybody wants it to change and become more innovative is another story, but being able to just like interact with so many different people. The thing that I do miss the most is the personalities on site. Like I haven't met anyone nicknamed like Mayhem Matt in a very long time. I'll tell you that much. Like, but also those same personalities, it's a different relationship where, I'm not. I don't remember the last time I've had to argue or even raise my voice.
Mm,
Right? Like that's a reality scenario. You're in a stand up meeting and sometimes things do get heated and I'm like, look, I don't know why I'm raising my voice. This person has been building longer than I've been alive, right? Like who am I to even raise, but like a schedule needs to be met. Things are not getting like this is the reality of the scenario. And I didn't really like seeing that side of myself sometimes. And uh I'm more hopeful for the future of construction management because you have some very old school people where they got things done because they had that presence where they could come into a room and scream and get what they wanted. And I think there's also the future generations who's like, look, I'm not going to subscribe to that type of getting things done. Like, maybe it's going to be more contract driven or more email driven, like whatever it may be. The going back, oh, that's such a like I would want to go back in certain senses, but I also still feel like I have so much left to do here uh, in this world. So I don't know. I would say 20% of me, maybe 30% of me wishes I were on a site every day, minus the traffic, no matter what, minus the traffic period.
yeah. I think
But
it is
then
interesting to, sorry, finish your thought.
no, no, and then I would just say like, the job doesn't always end because especially when you're a company that's international present, like I could be talking to someone on the Australia team at 8 p.m. Right? Like there's now it's like great. Like now it's even you can even take it the other extreme of you always have people that you can talk to and work with if you're an international company where certain superintendents were like, do not call me after 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Like I
Hmm.
don't care what's happening. Like figure it out. But yeah,
I mean, all
I'll
three of
end.
us sit in different time zones. I mean, this is the first time in my 15-year career that I've worked across time zones, and I could probably have a world clock here in my little office too. And yeah, it's totally different. I mean, I think you said it, Adam, of like just head down and focus on a project. Like you don't think about time zone. Maybe if it's like materials or design or like certain things that do cross time zones. But
Very
yeah,
rarely.
that is a very different experience now that I for sure didn't anticipate. I think one of the questions I have down there is like surprises. I didn't really think about the different aspects of, hey, like you're going to be working with people like in time zones that you wouldn't even you don't even know what acronyms mean, like of what APAC and EMEA means. And yeah, like that's going to require time and maybe just attention that you didn't think about when you were going into an office or going into a job site trailer. Well, fellas, it's been a good conversation. I love going back to stories because I think it just always brings up, I don't know, similarities, and we're not all that different, but yet I think we all do have kind of our different backgrounds and experiences. And I guess maybe I'll just leave it with this: is the grass greener, Brian? Like, he has to know, where do you sit on the? Has it been a pro positive, or has it been? I don't know. Time is yet to tell.
I think it's been less of not just the switch of the industry, but as you are becoming more mature as an adult, you start understanding that it's always up to me to define what I want in my life. Like, it's very easy to point at the construction industry that doesn't talk back and say it's their fault that I work nonstop or I showed up on the 4th of July because it was rain. Like, but that's on me at the end of the day. And I think you can work yourself to death in any industry, right? Right. Like, there's people who, in finance, that there's issues there, and it's not just construction. But what I will say is the lessons and the mentality and the people I got to work for that are a different level of inspiration of, this person is truly a expert in their field is something I would never trade for anything in the world. But having these types of conversations, I think, are important because we're in a scenario where we can have these conversations, and we don't necessarily work under, I don't want to say even work under the fear that it would ever come back, but it's very different to have a conversation about work-life balance when you're working for that entity.
Yeah.
So I think hopefully somebody out there can resonate, but it is always up to you. So
well
the grass is greener because I'm watering it the way I need to water it, not because of I changed locations.
Yeah, well said. Adam, any thoughts?
Yeah, Brian kind of hit what I was going to go for right there at the end. I think everyone's grass needs watering, right? Doesn't matter what side of what fence or whose yard you're looking in, everybody's grass could use a little more water. And I think that, to echo a lot of what Brian said, I think a lot of what I've realized, and maybe later in life than I've wanted to, maybe initially, is that it is I'm in control, right? I can make or break my path the way that I want to. And probably the biggest bit of advice that I give to younger people who I'm talking to through, involvement at universities and construction management programs is set boundaries. Be able to leave a job site at some point in your week, or, whatever it needs to be. If you have a hobby, make time, right? Thursdays, I'm leaving at 4 because that's what I got to go do, right? Like, you need to carve out time for yourself because we worked in an industry in construction directly where it will take as much as you will give. And, you got to remember that you can only give so much on a daily basis, and, just give the best you can for that number of hours that you need to, and go take care of yourself for the rest of the time. But a silly realization I had immediately after starting at Struction Site was, oh man, I can go to the dentist this week, right? Like, there's time for me to go and make an appointment to take care of myself. And that wasn't something that I considered, or it was even on the front burner of any stove in my life when I was, really in the thick of it. So set the boundaries, take care of yourself, and you can have a very fruitful career in construction. And if you're interested in the tech tools, come on over. You can have a great time here too.
Yeah, hard to go last year. I think you guys hit some pretty potent kind of components to it too. I think the last thing I would just say is it's really about the people. Like, if you're being stretched and mentored and really encouraged in a great environment, man, like, relish and thrive, and use that to your fullest advantage in the season that you're in. And if there is opportunity where there's people that can grow and stretch you in a new opportunity, and they see your strengths and they see your weaknesses and want to help, magnify one and lessen the other, like, hey, that sounds like a giant win too. And I think what's just interesting and kind of recapping some of this is, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. And I think, Adam, to your point, like, do the work that's hard, because sometimes the work on ourselves is the hardest. And Brian, I think, to your point, like, choosing and making active decisions of, improving the things of your own rather than just complaining about the circumstances you're in. And also, I would say surround yourself with great people, and you should expect some pretty powerful outcomes to come. So it's a great topic. It's something that I think, don't really feel like it gets airtime or at conferences or events or networking things, like in just this capacity to kind of sit down and talk about it. So fellas, always good hear new parts of your story, other parts that I maybe just laughing. Microsoft Paint, maybe we should design our new logos based on that. And Brian, I'm going to figure out how I can make phone calls from an iPod. Never thought about that either. So it's
I'm changing your contact photo to Clippy.
Clippy. Hey, Clippy's OG, man. It's don't hate on Clippy. It's
my takeaway here is Brian invented the iPhone. That's what I got out of this episode.
Nice. Well, fellas, it's been great conversation. Appreciate y'all, and yeah, thanks for tuning in and listening to us too. If it just seems silly not to mention, but if there's questions and thoughts and ideas and stirred up from folks that are listening out there, let us know. We'd love to kind of meet you and you're part of the journey where you're at. Answer any questions that we maybe didn't hit to, and just stay encouraging, and want to keep encouraging to dive into the things that are interesting to you and can grow you in your journey. So appreciate you all listening in, and we'll see you next week. Adios, fellas.